Hello. All right. So I hope that you all enjoyed your dinner. Thank you to Sodexo for providing us with this wonderful meal. So it is time to begin our panel and really hear from our experts here how to diversify the STEM education to career pipeline. But first, I would like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Norman Storm Robinson, who is the Executive Director of Professional Field Services here at EMSA. Prior to EMSA, Dr. Robinson was Program Director at Georgia Institute of Technology, Center for Education, integrating science, mathematics, and computing. He has extensive experience as an education specialist at NASA Glenn Research Center, National Institute of Aerospace, and NASA Langley Research Center. Please welcome Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to see all of you here this evening. We have an exciting and, I guess, engaging conversation that we're going to have you be a part of tonight. We have a list of panelists, or we have a table of panelists, rather, here this evening to discuss a little bit about diversity in STEM. I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, and then I will give them an opportunity to give a little brief little statement about why they are here and some of the things that really interest them when it comes to in regards to diversity. And then I'll open it up to a couple of questions that I will have first. I'll move them through some of our progression of some of the conversations that we've been having over dinner. And then towards the end, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask some questions to them, all right? Make sure I'm going to ask this table to make sure to let me know if I get too close, because I will fall. And please catch me. Please. All right. Don't fall? Okay, all right. All right. Thank you. All right, so first what we have in our highly esteemed and very knowledgeable panelists, we have Dr. Latifa Stanford, who is the Senior Scientist, Separations and Mass Spectrometry at BP. Please give her a round of applause. Next to her, we have Dr. Michael Horn, Assistant Professor at Northwestern University. You can raise your hand there. Next to him, we have Mike Salazar, Chief Process Engineer at Epstein Architecture, Engineering, and Construction. Next to him, we have Dr. Anna Kaatz, Director of Computational Sciences at Center for Women's Health Research, University of Wisconsin-Madison. And to round out our panel, we have Dr. Terrence Mays, Associate Dean and Graduate Education and Director at Stanford University School of Medicine. Please give our panelists a round of applause. So, like I said before, now that I've introduced you, I would like you to give a 1 to 2 sentence opening statement about why diversity is meaningful to you, or what you hope to probably even accomplish while you're sitting here and talking with us tonight. So we'll start with you, Dr. Stanford.
Hello, everyone. I'm here to share some of my experiences going through K through 12 and on to undergraduate and all the way up to my career, my experiences being someone who is a STEM professional and how that was nurtured, and also share experiences on how incidences may have discouraged it and how to combat that in the future, and also share some experiences positively in my career at how my organization does foster diversity and inclusion in the STEM field.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Mike. I'm at Northwestern University in the School of Education and Social Policy, as well as in computer science. And I'm involved in a number of research projects funded by the National Science Foundation, looking at increasing computational literacy and diversity and equity within computational literacy, and thinking about ways to sort of diversify not only the workforce, but just empower people generally and increase access.
Very good. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Salazar. I am also, besides my job that I get paid, my passion is I'm also the president of the Hispanic Engineers of Chicago. And I guess perhaps maybe that's the real reason why I'm here. I've been president for 8 years. A little bit more about what I do besides my job, which I do as well, is I go to corporations and I talk to them about diversity, and I talk to them about funding. I talk to them about funding minorities in college, in STEM, right? I oversee 10 colleges. We have SHIP chapters in 10 colleges. We adopted 5 high schools, and altogether we have about 39 corporate industrial partners that fund us, along with NSBE, along with SUI, along with the other, and I know many of you here are familiar with those organizations. But what I see, actually what I'm told, and one of the reasons why I'm late is I was with Boeing today, as a matter of fact, because they want to change a little bit of their footprint of going forward, is I see, when I go to these companies, corporations, large corporations, I see the need for diversity. Some of them have issues with having so many senior managers and not having people of color at that level, and now they're trying to correct it. But some have issues as well as becoming global and not supplying the second, third, and fourth language-speaking people to take care of their clients. So now there's backpedaling coming to these organizations saying, what can we do to solve it? And on top of that, we have a lot of people retiring, and technology changes, and there's nobody to fill the gap. So that's kind of what I do. My fun, my passion is I go to companies and I talk to them about diversity and funding to keep minorities in college into the STEM fields, and along bring in STEM awareness to high school students and in our colleges. So I'm honored to be here. I'm intimidated because I'm not a doctor. It's like I'm the non-doctor in the middle. But anyway, thank you guys. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anna Kaatz, and I have a large research program in the School of Medicine and Public Health at UW-Madison, focused on understanding and addressing reasons why women and racial ethnic minorities are underrepresented in science and medicine. And I guess my interest in diversity comes on multiple different levels. And I guess I'll take the opportunity here to say that our country is in crisis. Our country is in crisis. It has been in crisis for a long, long time. And we're finally getting federal funding agencies like the NIH and the NSF to realize that we need to help diversify colleges, universities, the science, and medical fields. And the reason they're motivated to do it is because of money. They're seeing that they're losing a return on investment from students that are leaving because of the poor climate. And I think we need to have a better reason than that. And I think a lot of why some of the diversity initiatives don't work is because they're focused in a sort of bureaucratic way. And so just to kind of open up that side of the question, that side of the dialogue, I can give you as much science and data as you want about what to do and how to do it, but people need to care and be committed to the work. And actually have a good reason for doing it besides money. And we're working on the government right now, but it's challenging. So not to go on and on, but.
Speak a little louder so the people way back there.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here and for having us. My name is Terrence Mays. I'm Associate Dean for Grad Ed, Graduate Education in the School of Medicine at Stanford. And I grew up in Fresno, California, which is a small town in the Central Valley of California. I grew up in a single family household. I grew up in a low income household, and just based on statistics, I should not be here where I am today. I should not have a college degree. I should not certainly be a dean at Stanford and or sitting up here talking to you today just based on statistics. Yet here I am. And I think part of what motivates me is to help individuals who were students who were in similar situations as mine to achieve to their fullest potential. When I started my higher education career, it did not take very long for me to start hearing reports from underrepresented minority students in particular, that they were having different experiences with the university climate than majority students. And I've dedicated my career to addressing that problem in particular.
Thank you very much. So, Dr. Mays, you said something about those statistics, right? Let me paint a picture for you. Think about the STEM jobs now. Think about on the gender side. Right now you have about 51% in STEM jobs, STEM and science jobs, those are white males. Whereas Black and Hispanic and other minorities make up a whopping 8% of those jobs. For females, you have 20% of those that are white females. For Black and Hispanic females, they only make up 5%. I'm gonna let that just sit there on your heart for a second as you think about that. When you look at race, in STEM jobs, you have 71% of those are white, and you have only 11% being made up of minorities, Black and Hispanics for STEM jobs. Change the Equation says that these jobs will grow between 2014 to 2024. They'll have a 17% growth, where non-STEM jobs will only have a 12% growth. So you see where the jobs are going to be growing. By 2020, if you look at just computer science, and let's look at one of the hot buttons or the hot topics in STEM jobs. Look at computer science and females. 1.4 million computer science jobs will be available by publication of the United States Department of Labor. There will only be enough training or enough trained graduates to fill 29% of those 1.4 million jobs. Right now, there are 0.4% of high school girls who are selecting CS, computer science, as a track for them for a job. 0.4%. In the field of engineering, minorities will make up 11% of all engineering majors in the United States. And these numbers are from different places, Change the Equation, U.S. Department of Labor, and other sources of that respect. So as you think about those numbers, it almost seems like a crisis. So I'm going to ask the panel, what type of factors, especially at the K-12 level, do you think are contributing to minorities not choosing STEM as a major or as something they even want to study? And maybe even their performance in STEM as you think about them going through school?
Can we respond?
Yes, you can respond,
okay.
please. Yeah.
So there's a large and growing body of research showing that just common ubiquitous stereotypes about race and gender are incredibly powerful predictors of where people end up in their careers. So if you look at the content of the stereotype about women, we think of women as kind and compassionate, as nurturing, as communal. We see women feeling more comfortable and being more likely to be directed towards fields where those sorts of qualities are valued. And whereas for men, men are seen as sort of agentic and logical and strong. And so we see men from an early age feeling like they have a better fit in fields like science and math, where those agentic traits are needed to be successful. And we see the same thing with race. And so it's just one part of it, but stereotypes are incredibly powerful predictors of behavior. They impact the way we treat individuals. So we treat female and male students differently. We treat white and black students differently. In addition to that, you see yourself differently because of the content of stereotypes that you internalize. And so that's just one factor in a really, really complex structural problem, where we have systematic race bias and we have systematic gender bias impeding the progress of individuals. And so that's just something.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Another perspective is exposure, and when you expose children to STEM careers, waiting until middle school and certainly high school is a little bit too late. I've worked with programs where I've gone into pre-K schools, first grade and kindergarten, where we do little science activities with the children and get them starting to think about the scientific method and starting to ask questions about the world around them. And at that age, when children are a sponge, girls, boys, minorities, majority culture children alike, they're all interested in answering those questions about the world around them, and it's starting that spark to build that interest in science. So I believe that we need to start exposing children a lot earlier. Unfortunately, these programs I've worked with, they've been funded for private schools and not so much exposure to public schools unless there was a grant afforded. So I guess getting more grant money so that programs like this can be introduced into K through first grade, early instead of waiting until middle school to expose children and plant that seed of love for science and technology would be a key.
Well, Dr. Stansford, one of the issues when you have these young children aspiring or making these decisions about whether to really pursue a STEM career or even do well in the STEM discipline is sometimes their own identity. If they see themselves in that, doing well in that particular subject, like a black male saying, well, I can be a great engineer. I see myself as that. How much do you think is very independent, or even if it's important, that we start helping them experience some things so they can form their identity to make these types of choices?
It's very important to have someone that looks like you coming to do these programs. I served on the board for Science, Engineering, and Math Link for several years, and the objective of that organization is to bring awareness and bring educational opportunities to children in the science, engineering, and math technology fields using professionals that represent their culture or their identity. It wasn't just for minorities, but it was also for all children. So if it was a school in a rural middle America, then we sourced professionals that grew up from that field so they could share their experience that, okay, I was a poor rural child, but yet I went on to do X, Y, Z. Or for my instance, I'm a black woman, and I would go and speak and do activities with the children there. And so when the children see someone that looks like them, it solidifies that, yes, I can pursue that and be successful as well, versus someone else coming in that doesn't look like you. It seems like a pipe dream.
Right. Any other comments? Yes. Mm-hmm.
To add to that, quite frankly, when I give STEM talks at colleges, and I give several of them, and as a matter of fact, in the last 30 days, I did 13 speeches at colleges. The two facts that I see in all schools, colleges and high schools, is two things. One is role model. They don't have role models. You know how many times I am asked and begged saying, you're a Latino, you have a master's in engineering, you're like this rare breed in our neighborhood, because nobody comes back to talk to the kids, right? And just to reiterate, somebody that looks like you. So when I go talk to colleges and even high schools, they're amazed that I'm a Mexican with a master's that speaks Spanish who was from the hood. It's unbelievable. I don't exist. That goes for African Americans as well, too. The simple thing is, how many of us that have a degree, even a bachelor's and associates, you'll be amazed if you go back and you sit there and you talk to kids in a classroom and say, I went to just college, you see their eyes light up, because sometimes when they're in those classrooms and they don't have money for lunch or they don't have money for the good shoes, they're feeling pretty down, right? But when you come and you say, you know what, you can do this, and you speak their language or you look like them, you may not influence 30, all of them, but you might influence one, right? And that's That's one of the things I see. The second thing I see, and I talk to, is parents, right? There's two different kinds, and I'm Mexican. So we have Latino parents is one of the one things, what do we do? What do we come here to do? Work, right? You work. Parents, you work, you work, you work, and you instill that in your kids to work, right? A lot of Latinos are afraid to fill out a form, an FAFSA form, a credit card form, a driver's license. So they're going to take that fear and they're going to instill it into their kids. We don't get a loan. We can't afford college because we don't have cash to pay for college. So as a parent, they're already instilling fear and doubt about going to colleges in the kids, right? That's another thing. A lot of times when we have events on Saturdays, the kids don't go because their parents work. When we have events and we say, bring your parents, we have 10 kids for one parent. And I think a lot of that is because the parents don't understand the importance of STEM itself because they're wrapped up in work, right? And, well, let the school, let the college take care of your education stuff. But yet, if they're not behind you, if they don't show up, if they're not there, I think a lot of the is educating the parents first, right? How many parents do you think would know what a subsidized loan is, or the difference between a private school and a public school? How many of them really know what STEM means? Most of us don't even know what STEM means because it's still new. But I think the parents are the ones, if you get the parents behind the program, they help push the kids forward, even if you have a role model. But anyway, that's my thought on it.
Dr. Horn, you look like you wrote down 2 or 3 items there.
Yeah, I mean, so I come at this thinking about a lot about computer science, and there's this drumbeat of we need to teach kids coding and
Right.
coding this, coding that, and a lot of the funding agencies and sort of educational efforts have this metaphor of the leaky pipeline. Maybe some of you are familiar with this metaphor, which I have some issues with in that, you know, it sort of frames our children as leaks, and this pipeline is funneling kids into jobs as sort of a way to other people's points, as a way to kind of like backfill labor shortages or increase diversity in workforces. I think an alternate metaphor that I like a lot better is to think about computation as a literacy. And to your point, you know, we can't start teaching kids when they're infants as a way to promote literacy. We need to be thinking about how do we promote the next generation of STEM literate children. That means informal opportunities. It means we need to be funding community organizations. We need to be funding museums. K-12 education cannot do this on its own. There are much, much bigger systemic societal issues at play. And to your point about identity, you know, literacy is all tangled up in identity. It's when you say, I am literate, that's an identity, that's a powerful source of identity. And I think that, you know, sort of helping our kids become STEM literate is an important thing that we should be thinking about, just as a way to like empower kids, support their interests. You know, if a kid is interested in Harry Potter, they can read Harry Potter. If they're interested in Twilight, they can read Twilight. Just the same way we can have a variety of literacies, like let's fuel kids' interests and push in that direction.
So, you know, you're empowering these students and they're coming into a K-12 environment, but they're still running up against these biases, right? So, Dr. Mays, if you could talk about how were some of the ways that these biases are really directing the students in their decision towards maybe a STEM career, or maybe some ways that they are being, the social construct that we are in is actually reifying some of those stereotypes and just hindering up the whole process altogether.
No, it's a great question. I mentioned when I opened that when I started my higher education career, I started hearing these reports from students of color, from female students. I worked in engineering at the time, who were reporting different and often negative experience with the climate in higher education at that particular university. And so I decided to study this. And in my study, one of the things that I found was that there are actual structural systems in place that pushed these students out of the STEM majors, right? And so there's, for example, these what's called weeder courses that students will have to take if they're an engineering major or a science major in their first year. And if they happen to fail that course, they may go to an academic advisor, and that academic advisor may say, you know what, if you can't pass this particular class, maybe engineering is not for you. Maybe you should consider name whatever other major out there that they may think is easier. So there's some systemic issues in place within higher education, and those same systemic challenges are in place within the K through 12 environment as well. There is, I want to go back really quickly to what was discussed earlier about the identity formation, because there is a dilemma that I even struggle with on a regular basis, and that is what I call the diversity tax, right? And so, yes, our students, our children need role models. They need mentors, and ideally mentors who look like them in order to really build that confidence. Sometimes they don't even know that they can aspire to become a scientist or an engineer because they don't know anyone else who looks like them that is a scientist or engineer. That said, because there are so few minority scientists and engineers, underrepresented minorities, or female scientists and engineers, they are often called upon to do any and everything related to diversity and be the diversity champion for everyone. And so on top of their regular job or their day-to-day struggles, they also are often called upon to really champion diversity efforts and inclusion, when this should be a responsibility that we all bear. That's not often the case. And so the advice that I would give parents, if you can't find an individual or individuals to mentor your child, a person of color, look for other opportunities to expose your child to positive role models who are working in STEM, positive role models of color or positive female role models. Take them to a NSBE convention, the National Society of Black Engineers, or a SWE convention, the Society for Women Engineers, or SHIP for Hispanic Professional Engineers, or find television programming that presents positive images of minority scientists and engineers, or other forms of media. There are other ways that you can expose your child to this without actually identifying a mentor who has the time and the bandwidth to work with your child individually.
Thank you. Panelists, I want you to, I'm going back to something that Dr. Horn mentioned, because I think this is something that I would like the audience to really grasp and understand. Think about, well, many moons ago, I used to work for an organization where I was charged with increasing the number of students going into the STEM pipeline, which Dr. Horn called the leaky pipeline. So if you think about all of these students that are supposed to push through this pipeline, of course you're starting with a big number of students that are going through a pipeline. If you mentally picture how a pipeline is actually very small, so you have a large number going through this pipeline. Well, at the end, some don't even make it, so you start off with a large number of students that you're charged with pushing through this pipeline, and with only very few coming out. How can that be seen as a deterrent to maybe someone who is underrepresented, who is underserved, who maybe doesn't have the access from the onset, and how does that further prevent them or even reify some of the social structures that we have that where only a certain few and chosen few can actually go through this pipeline? And we can start with any one of you all. Go ahead, Dr. Kaatz.
I think it's an interesting, I mean, it's a good question, and it's complicated. And to sort of piggyback on what we were talking about earlier, you know, there's a whole science to workforce diversity that's usually ignored by organizations. Like they put the diversity issues in the hands of like HR, you know, or something like that. And so, you know, thinking about how people get messages that STEM is a good fit for them, that the pipeline's going to work out, you know, or that it's not. That's not a mystery what happens. You know, there's a really clear science behind it. I'm an interventionist, so, you know, we know from like decades of research on social cognitive theory that if you don't build somebody's self-efficacy for a domain, like for, you know, chemistry or mathematics or whatever, they're not going to be interested in it, and they're not going to want to persist in it. And how do you build self-efficacy? There's 4 experiences you have to have. You need to have role models, which we talked about is kind of problematic. You need to have mastery experiences. You need to have, like, you need to be appraised in like a positive way when you're doing something in a mastery experience. So you need like positive performance of, you know, persuasion. And the 4th thing is you need to be doing that activity, that mastery experience, in a state where you're not anxious, where you're relaxed. And if you, so it's not a mystery. You know, we know how to like make scientists. It's just that we only do this for white men. I mean, honestly, like, and so people think, oh, you know, Billy's just so much better at science than, you know, Carlton. Not true. Billy's treated differently. They could be in the same school, and Billy will, you know, have role models and get more attention to like master science skills and stuff. And so if we don't change the way that we treat students, you know, and thinking like stereotypes and bias is a major factor that contributes to that, as well as, you know, systematic racism and other things like that that limit the resources that different schools have. Right. You know, depending upon where they are. So this is a complicated problem, but, you know, solving it is we know how to make scientists. Right. You know, and you know, in my program, I run programs for postdoctoral students who are from historically underrepresented groups, and for graduate students from historically underrepresented groups. And the thing that we're seeing is that self-efficacy for the domain isn't enough for the underrepresented students. You have to teach them coping self-efficacy. Right. So coping self-efficacy is your ability to understand you're in a stressful situation, evaluate what type of stress you're in, and apply a specific type of strategy that's appropriate for it. And so, because it's stressful. I mean, like, it's stressful for every student, but if you're a minority student, you're experiencing all sorts of types of biases. You also have to become bias literate. You know, and so I was talking earlier today to some folks here, and, you know, one of the things that we're seeing is a lot of my programs are funded by the National Institutes of Health, and we just had a review like this last year, and they came out and they were like, we can't have an a la carte program for every student. And I was like, you do it for white men. You know, I mean, and they don't know it, you know, like the system works that way for like the majority, you know, members of the system. It doesn't work like that for the rest of us. Well, and it's seen as like extra work. So not to go on and on, but.
So yeah. I'm gonna refer back to Dr. Horn because you first talked about the leaky pipeline. So what are some of your thoughts in regards to that question? I think you're on.
Right. I mean, I feel like all of these, how do I say this? Setting kids up for, you know, to.
Hold the mic close.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, the diversity tax, that's real, right? The systematic bias that kids face in these programs is real. Not having the role models is real. Not having I'm going to go back to this idea of not having a diversity of rich experiences leading into your formal education is a real problem. When I work with kids on, we're going to introduce you to, we do this program where we, kids use Python, which is a programming language, to create music, okay? It's a program called Ear Sketch. And I talk to one kid and I say, have you ever done coding before? I've never even heard of coding. What's coding? And I talk to another kid and I say, have you ever done coding before? And they say, oh yeah, I did Scratch in my summer camp. And when the kid who's done Scratch in that summer camp, they have a foundation to build on. They have a reference point, an anchor point. They have an experience that they can use to translate into this new experience that they can use to translate into another experience. So when you bring kids into a formal education program, they are not starting at the same place at all. And so all of these other things are just on top of that, right? So we have to, sorry, we have to be thinking about how to give kids rich experiences before they get into the school doors that have gotten them excited and gotten them interested and gotten them passionate. And so
Right.
that's really where I'm.
Now, in some respects, in some cases, that it's kind of hard when you have the parent that's working at night while the student is at home. So some way we have to kind of mold even the curriculum or the pedagogy to be more culturally responsive, right? So, Dr. Stanford, I know we talked about this earlier. What are some of your experiences in making the learning environment more culturally responsive for the student?
Specifically through school or outside of?
Both, even outside would be be better.
So making the, can you restate the question again?
Yeah, making the teaching and learning experience more culturally responsive to meet the cultural needs of the student.
Making it more culturally responsive, meet the cultural needs of the student. Say one is through having mentors that look like you and are familiar with you, and also having, if that's not available, having educators or outreach volunteers that have been trained in unconscious bias and have a appreciation for the culture. And so that also, I guess, provides one of the points that Dr. Kaatz hit on being able to practice a skill or learn a skill in a relaxed environment. So I feel that that's pretty necessary.
Okay. So in one other item that, because we're running short of time, I want to hit one more question that I had before I open it up to the audience. One that struck a nerve with everyone on the panel was the retention in STEM careers. And we talked a little bit about the mental health aspect. So Dr. Mays, if you'd like to go ahead, and how do we address those issues where you're looking at burnout when you have, because minorities or underrepresented populations seem to have to work harder, have this insane standard that they work to. How would we address that?
Yeah, I typically don't like to take sort of this deficit approach to solving the problem in that, and this is something that institutions often do, in which we say, the student has this particular challenge, they have this deficiency, and we need to do what we can to get them up to speed. I actually think there are issues within the system that is causing the student to not achieve at the same level as others. That said, a STEM career is very difficult. Doing STEM work at the K-12 level and certainly at the college level is very challenging for anyone. And for minorities, those who are underrepresented in the field, it's even harder. You're dealing every single day with one microaggression or another. particularly if you're an underrepresented minority attending a primarily white institution, such as Stanford. The students that I work with report to me that, you know, they may come into the classroom and, you know, someone asks, you know, are you the janitor? You know, you might think that would not happen, but that actually happens. Or others are expressing surprise that they are or received a particular fellowship or on a research project. And the literature shows that with microaggression, these individual incidents in and of themselves are not all that harmful, but the cumulative effect, the cumulative impact of microaggressions day in and day out can have an extremely harmful effect on one's academic achievement, on one's sense of belonging and other issues. What we have to do with students is help them to really cultivate resilience and confidence and self-efficacy. And there are a number of ways to do that. One is, as been mentioned before, mentorship. The other is ensuring that there's some sense of community. This is where critical mass matters, right? If you are the only female student in the classroom, you cannot help but to be out of place. But if there are 10 women in the classroom and you are doing something structurally where those women feel supported and that they're a part of the group, then they're going to be more likely to speak up, to ask questions, to engage. But we have to be very intentional at the structural, at the institutional level about how we promote diversity.
Thank you very much. This is where I get to fulfill a lifelong dream of being Oprah or Phil Donahue. So I'm glad you all laughed because that lets me know that you're still alive. So you're going to ask, okay, you're going to be the first one then, since I'll run to you. Please stand up, and I'll give you, yes, have to stand up.
Yeah, I got it. My voice carries. What is the role of historically black colleges and other institutions that have the highest success rates of graduating students of color who are producing the most engineers or STEM-related professionals? What is the role of those institutions in ensuring that their success? If there's schools like UIC who have a girls' floor for all females, a dorm, where they study together and they are proven to have higher retention rates or graduation rates of their female students who live on the science floor, what can be done to replicate those programs to increase the radius of our pipeline?
I can speak to my experience. I went to Florida State University, which is in Tallahassee, Florida, and it's also in the same city as a predominantly black university, FAMU. And so from my experience, I'm the second black person in the history of the world to get a chemistry PhD from Florida State. And the reason behind that was that the university program would pick, one minority candidate. They'd be alone. They wouldn't fit in. And by their second year or whatever, they would flunk out. And it was thought, black students aren't successful. And so there was a researcher like Dr. Kaatz that presented information like, FAMU is just down the street, and they are churning out, PhDs in engineering, like electrical engineering and the hard sciences, and showed that from her studies, it was a study on Native American students where in the same instance, if they were alone at a PWI institute, they didn't have their cultural support, and they would flunk out. And so she used that model and challenged the department to bring in, it was 5 of us that year, 5 African-American students. And 4 out of the 5 ended up getting our PhD from that university. Another one, she transferred to another university, and she did get her PhD. So it was proven that we are a community-based people. All people are community-based, people. And when you have that group, that community, and you urging each other on and feel community support, you are successful. And I'm happy to say that because of Dr. Stith's work, that they are accepting and churning out lots of African American students. So there's no longer that question that African American students can't handle the program. So that changed their minds in terms of becoming aware of different cultures and success for different cultures. So with that being said, training on that for universities and other people, and also in the workplace, to become aware of different cultures and also dispel some perceptions that they might have negatively about different cultures, so that we can, in the workplace, work well together. And then also, in terms of education, be able to support students so that they are successful.
Thank you.
Can I just really quickly say that because I was talking about cultivating confidence earlier, and I think HBCUs do an incredible job building confidence of its students. I have friends who are at Morehouse, who went to Morehouse College, and you cannot tell them that they're not like the kings of the world. And I think, right? Yeah. And I think that's something that other universities can learn from. And then really quickly, there's a great partnership, an innovative partnership between Vanderbilt and Fisk University and their physics department, which has become the nation's largest producer of African-American physics in the country, right? And so there are opportunities for R1 institutions to partner with HBCUs in a really mutually beneficial way.
Thank you.
Good evening. I wanted to thank you for being here today and sharing your information. I'm coming from two different perspectives, one from the perspective of being a university professor and one from the perspective of rearing a child that I wanted to be a STEM daughter, a STEM person, so my daughter. And what I kind of latched on to what you've said was this idea of exposure. But exposure can be cost prohibitive. So there are programs out there that can expose young people to the various different fields in the STEM spectrum. But how many of those programs are actually accessible? And that's from a cost perspective. I found a program available at U of I that I took my daughter to, free program. But we had to pay and stay for a week at in Urbana-Champaign. Again, having the means to be able to do so was fortunate for me, but recognizing that that's not available to all. And then knowing people who have children who've done what they were supposed to do, who've excelled in the K through 12 public school system, and have been accepted to science-based programs at the university, just to find out that they don't receive enough financial assistance and have to turn down those opportunities. So what are our private sector in our university, our public sectors, and our nonprofit sectors doing in partnership with the community, with the parents, to make exposure a reality?
Go ahead, Dr. Horn. I know Mrs. Salazar, you have a lot of experience working with those types of programs as well. But you can go ahead first.
I was just going to say that this is a huge problem, and especially now that STEM has become a buzzword that's on billboards. Private institutions see profit in providing enrichment programs that are cost prohibitive. So I look to innovative models like Nicole Pinkert's work at UMedia and the Harold Washington Library in Chicago that, is providing rich, free STEM programs where kids can go in and create and explore. And that model of using public institutions like libraries, universities, but it's not enough, and we need to do way more and really look at these issues of segregation in our cities today that are just how do we without I think we need like new models, and like I said, Nicole Pinkert's work in UMedia is one great example of that, but we need more of those models. There's new work to kind of create a network of learning centers throughout Chicago that's trying to fill some of these gaps. But we need more. Thanks for raising that.
And I agree, and that's a great question. But believe it or not, I guess I kind of see the opposite almost, because my organization and myself, I'm the one that's knocking on doors and getting people to get involved, right? The Adler Planetarium, the Museum of Science and Industry, the Shedd Aquarium, they actually have STEM programs. They have STEM programs that they can't even get anybody to go to. So they come to me, or they come to our organization saying, listen, we have this money, we got this grant, and we can't get anybody to come to the Shedd. We can't get anybody to come to Museum of Science and Industry, the Mecca of Science. They don't have, they're an organization. They says, Mike, we don't have your reach. We don't have these not-for-profits reach the network to advertise, to market, to bring somebody here. You look on our website. Metro for girls and Midtown for boys is actually funded by Boeing, Walgreens, and ComEd. They actually have an engineering program, an entrepreneur program. They have a health program sponsored by Walgreens. And I think it's like $300, $325 for the summer. And they get financial aid. You can get it almost at $100. But these are the organizations that are funded. They do have funding, but unfortunately, it doesn't get out. It doesn't get out far enough, because right away, the inner cities is, well, how are we going to drive there, right? You're going to take a bus. It's dangerous. You can't get there. You have a lot of other things, and this is where organizations like myself, we provide funding, right, for school buses for them to go. But obviously, that would rely on our colleges to do that as well. So there are programs, obviously, but if it's more of a science-based and engineering programs, there really are. There's also a lot of like a STEM competitions. There's bridge building competitions at IIT and even at UIC as well too. So I guess it's just a matter of research and understanding where to go, but also you have to remember the logistics on how do you get your kids to get here as well too. I don't know too much in the suburbs, but more in the city, there's quite a few of them like that. And there's organizations that you were saying. You can reach with, SHIP, you could do an SB. We have the list, because a lot of our paid members work that and volunteer for that as well too.
Well, I'll add to that, as you said, in the suburbs, right here at EMSA, we do have residential programs, summer programs. So if you would like to go and check imsa.edu and look at our summer programs, I'm quite for sure you'll find one that's right for you. It's my shameless plug. Anyway,
Could I
here's our
piggyback?
last question here.
My question, especially on the elementary level, is there a way to get the parents more involved? Like have them come to the school so when the kids are learning cultural diversity in school, they go home and will hear the same thing because their parents have been educated? Does that make sense?
Bring them to school. That's most important.
Do you have any other types of, I know STEM at the elementary levels is a big issue, and one is parent involvement, and then also is teacher preparation. Dr. Kaatz, do you have any comments?
Sure. I know, just kind of thinking about these questions, and they're so good and rich. I think, okay, so we're listening to, like, there's pots of money for STEM. We know that there's ways to get people into STEM that aren't happening. Like, there's this huge gap in terms of what we know and what we're doing and who has the money and who doesn't have the money and who knows about it and who doesn't know about it. And I just keep thinking about, like, systems that are successful, and there needs to be, like, a government intervention, or something that normalizes STEM education for everybody. Because education, just like medicine, is run like a business. If you're rich enough to get your kid into a good school with access to all these things, then you're going to be successful, and they're going to be successful. So I think that's really problematic. And so unless we do something about that, people who have higher status, more money in society are going to always be out-competing people who don't. They're going to be the ones getting the good education and stuff. So, I know it's like sort of a problematic thing to just call for large cultural change, but I'm calling for it because we need it. And without that, we're not going to make the progress that we need to. And the reason we're not making that progress is because there's so many business interests and other things going on that prevent, equity in education and healthcare and all these things. So our country, like I'm saying to begin with, is in a crisis. We need to think about how things are going because they're benefiting very few people, and we're all paying for it.
Just to add real quick what we were talking about, and you're exactly right. I see there's 10 chapters in Chicago, right? And I know there's some companies here that specifically go to that specific college for that specific engineer, but they won't go to any other colleges, right? The funny thing. And you know the reason why? Is because they know the type of kids, the type of admittance, the type of GPA, what high school they went to. They actually filled the leaking pipeline. Companies like ComEd, Caterpillar, companies like Exelon, Boeing that I deal with, they only go to 2 schools. They only go to 2 colleges. They're not going to go to the 3rd or the 4th. They're not going to go to NIU, but they'll go to Urbana. And I ask why. But they won't answer why. But the fact is because they know why. Because the entrance exam, the GPAs in that school is higher than some of the rest. But those are the people they want working for them. But unfortunately, I think that's a problem. And it's corporate driven, right? Let me ask one more thing, adding to the pipeline. My pipeline, my definition of the pipeline, you have high schools. You have 10 high schools, right? That's your pipeline because all of those high schools are going to be putting out a certain amount of students. But guess what? In those high schools that I find, I go talk to a Whitney Young, or I go talk to a very good high school. Their teachers are masters, PhD, very, very knowledge in math. They want me to help them with a STEM program all day long. But I go to some high schools, and I go there, and I talk to them, and they say, listen, you're an engineer. Please don't talk that math to me because I'm a music teacher, and they put me teaching math this semester, so I really don't kind of get that engineering stuff. But, it's funny, it's sad, but it's true. Right. But these are some of the issues that I see. So now you take that pipeline, those 10 schools or the 100 schools, and now you only have a certain amount filling it. And guess what they do? They get in that pipeline. They get in the pipeline, they get into college, and they get the job. And it's corporate driven. And I see that because right now this is where I try to get these corporations to try to go to what they call their top tier 1 schools and the top tier 2 schools. But unfortunately, that's kind of an issue that we were saying. We need to change that thought. But unfortunately, it's the one who makes the money, the one who makes the rules. A lot of that. And it's in our college. And college and education is a business, just like what you were saying. It's sad, but that's what we face as an engineer and in STEM as well, too.
All right, we have one question here.
Well, I didn't really have a question. I had a statement. I wanted to first address the statement about parents and schools. I really think that there needs to be more collaboration between community organizations, schools, and the parents. I run an organization in Chicago called Project Sincere, and we do a lot of outreach for students of 1 through 12 to try to educate and empower more young people to go into the fields of engineering. And to the young lady right here, I have a program. I don't know if you live in the city or not, but there are a ton of programs in the city, like Mike said, that really try to address students across the spectrum to really get them more engaged in STEM at an early age.
And we have a question right here.
It's actually a comment and then a question. I want to piggyback off what you just said. There's a program, I'm a teacher at McCutcheon Elementary in the Uptown neighborhood on Chicago's north side. And we have a partnership with a program called Science and Society that's actually started by scientists at Northwestern. It's been going really successful for several years. And what they actually do is they recruit grad students to be mentors for the kids. And it's housed in the Boys and Girls Club in the Uptown neighborhood. And the kids go to meet with their mentors once a week, and they do science experiments together. It's a very successful program, and now we're starting to see the first kids enter college in STEM. So they actually follow them to collect data in that respect. So talk to me if you want to actually go visit and check it out for yourself. I'm really dying to hear from one of the EMSA students. If you can speak in regards to overcoming some of the stereotypes and things we've been talking about on the panel, I would really appreciate it.
No? Over there? Okay. All right. Yes.
Okay. So I just came back from, oh, yes, my name is Kaatz George. I'm a junior here at EMSA. I just came back from Clemson University at the Men of Color Summit, National Men of Color Summit with Storm and 9 other students, EMSA students. And one of the things that I take away most from it is when Tavis Smiley spoke. One of the things he said was the definition of love, right? Which was, sorry, which was people are worthy just because, right? And he was saying if everybody were to have that mindset or mentality of everybody else, how different would this world be, right? And I constantly think now, every time more I'm hearing about it and seeing all this just discrimination everywhere, you know, I wonder why isn't it that equality isn't assumed, right? And it's because people aren't convinced that it should be consumed. So I guess my question is, how can we get to convince people of that? Because you notice that when people aren't convinced of stuff, humans are naturally lazy, or I believe that, right? Humans are naturally lazy, right? If we're not convinced to do something, we're not gonna do it, right? So how can we convince people that equality should be assumed, that we should all have the same, I don't wanna say same opportunities, but same chance to do things, I guess you could say.
Any thoughts on that, panel? It's kind of deep, isn't it?
I can.
Don't be scared. No.
Yeah. No. Just really quickly, it's a great question, and you know, when we do this work, diversity and inclusion work, we wish everyone was sort of intrinsically motivated. But we know from doing this work for as long as a lot of us have been doing it that that's just not the case. And so what we have to do is really make a business case for diversity and inclusion. One thing that our campus president recently said, we have a new president of our university, and during his inauguration, he said that, you know, diversity is a reality. Inclusion is a necessity. And equity is something that we strive for. And I really think that really sums it up. You know, we're already living in a diverse society, and so we don't necessarily need to convince anyone that that's the case. What we need to do is continue to strive for equity and social justice, right?
I wanted to respond to your question. I'm Carrie Milne-Zellman. I teach biology at Aurora University. And I have found, with teaching biology, I've found that I think many of our first-year students are unaware of the deep past of social inequity structurally in our country. They're not aware of how even laws that were put into place in the 1950s are still enabling, you know, the middle-class white family to have this different education than children that grow up in the city. And so I believe that they, you know, once I start these conversations with them, and then they start to realize why there's been, you know, this system in place, or, you know, why that still affects all of us today, I think it really helps bridge a lot of that understanding and compassion. So I just wanted to leave it there. We even get into discussions about how science itself has been, you know, misused in the past, the history of that to try to, you know, separate people. Or even IQ tests, what's the history of that? And so there's all of these social systems that they're not even aware of that have been set in place. So that helps a lot.
Thank you very much. Please join me in giving the panelists a round of applause. Thank you, panelists, for your input. And also then turn around and give each other a round of applause, because you all gave some very good and engaging questions. And I'd like to turn it back over to Dr. Coleman.
All right, and thank you very much, Dr. Robinson, for moderating this wonderful panel. So now it's time to hear from you all, the people who are out there doing the work. How do we, change this? How do we diversify the STEM education pipeline to STEM careers? So we're going to break out into our small group discussions, and we're going to continue this conversation. So group one, if you would go with Tracy Ellis, and also my facilitators, don't forget to press record on the audio.